There's a hidden aspect, just like there's a hidden aspect to many other groups in this world, that is not exactly as it's portrayed on the surface, and is very dark and very, very coercive and bad, and I would very quite easily dare to say evil to the bone. Proceeding on to an article from Executive Intelligence Review, which is, as far as I'm aware, associated with the LaRouche Foundation, which Lyndon LaRouche, I think he was in Congress at some point, and I first encountered the material of the LaRouche Foundation in college. Somebody just randomly handed me a pamphlet. And what's interesting, given the video that I made this morning, was that the pamphlet, I believe the title was called The Blogosphere and the Noosphere, and I forget what the subtitle was, but the blogosphere, obviously everybody knows what that word is who's watching my video right now. The noosphere is basically the sphere of knowledge, of noetic information, of collective psychic and psychological information. The memes, right, is noetic information, and it's just interesting because I got that information back then and I was like, wow, this is a little wacky. But it was basically talking about how these tech companies are trying to gain a stranglehold on information so that they can control people's perception of reality. And back then, I was definitely awakened to the nature of the control grid, but I still didn't necessarily know what this whole deal was with, Google. And back then, I just wasn't that deep into this aspect of it. And now, given the current state of things, this is the flashpoint. This is the crisis aspect. But back then it was just warming up. Now it's boiling over, and the pot is about to explode. Right. So this is by Executive Intelligence Review, entitled "Israeli Spies: Mega Was Not an Agent, Mega Was the Boss" by Jeffrey Steinberg. One should also take note, but basically that Jeffrey Steinberg and Jeremy Roth Kushel, basically, again, this isn't about basically anything anti-Jewish. The biggest people who are taking down the control grid are often Jewish themselves, and they realize that they've been lied to, just like we've been lied to. This control grid spans all people. So that's why I said at the beginning, I definitely appreciate Axeman for coming by our channel, for watching the video and providing this information. But it's just important to avoid the perception wherever possible that this is an anti-Jewish thing, because it's really not. And again, if you want to go far enough back, the real Jews are the Irish. So, 2,000 years ago, the Ashkenazim weren't Jewish. They were just people. I don't even know what. It was probably some pagan religion of the Eastern Europe lands back then, and then they became Jewish. And that's fine as far as Jewish, basically ethics and morality is concerned. But there's a hidden aspect, just like there's a hidden aspect to many other groups in this world, that is not exactly as it's portrayed on the surface, and is very dark and very, very coercive and bad, and I would very quite easily dare to say evil to the bone. Here we go. Israeli spies: Mega was not an agent, Mega was the boss. For a brief period of time in early 1997, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the National Security Agency engaged in a frantic mole hunt for an Israeli spy, believed to be operating inside the highest levels of the Clinton administration national security establishment. By the time the mole hunt was made public in a May 7, 1997 Washington Post leak, the hunt had been abruptly ended, and for all intents and purposes, the story disappeared from the news within a matter of days. According to the Post account, in January 1997, the National Security Agency, NSA, had intercepted a phone conversation between an Israeli official at the embassy in Washington and Danny Yatom, the head of the Mossad, Israel's foreign intelligence service. The official sought permission from the spy boss to, quote, go to Mega in order to obtain a copy of a confidential letter that had been sent by then U.S. Secretary of State Warren Christopher to Palestinian Authority President Yasser Arafat concerning U.S. assurances about a recently negotiated agreement for an Israeli military withdrawal from the Hebron area in the West Bank. Yatom, according to the NSA intercept, rejected the request, admonishing his agent, quote, this is not something we use Mega for. The idea that the Israeli government was running another spy operation inside the U.S. national security establishment created a tremendous stir. The Washington Post, in its May 7, 1997 leak, had reported one official with the knowledge of the FBI investigation into the identity of Mega cautioned that much remained unknown. But the official said that if it turned out that a senior U.S. official was passing sensitive information to Israeli authorities, it could prove more serious than the espionage case involving Jonathan J. Pollard, a former Navy analyst who was convicted in 1986 of selling U.S. military intelligence documents to Israel. To this day, the Pollard affair is a hot-button issue inside the U.S. intelligence community. At the time of Pollard's arrest in November 1985, it was known that the Navy analyst had been tasked to obtain specific U.S. military intelligence secrets by someone much higher up in the U.S. intelligence community. To this day, the hunt for Mr. X, Pollard's inside controller, continues. In 1986, a quick sidebar, this article is not from 2019. This article appeared in the August 31st, 2001 issue of Executive Intelligence Review. Okay, literally less than 2 weeks before 9/11. Again, also at the time when there were congressional investigations into Defense Department use of funds, and how there was, I believe, about $4.2 trillion that was unaccounted for, right? And then 9/11 happened, and of course we all know that the narrative just went in a whole new direction. It dominated all narratives and took the entire world in a new direction. And, and then, it was literally the area where they were keeping the records inside the Pentagon that supposedly got hit by an airplane. It's like it's like the Jeffrey Epstein thing and the JFK thing. It's like, the libertarians often like to say, I don't believe in conspiracies because the government's not that competent. Yeah, do you think that the government in the nominal, surface level sense is the one actually carrying these things out? No, it's secret factions that are operating within that structure and occupying key positions of power to control the flow of information. If you don't understand that, you're not a very smart libertarian, and you probably shouldn't be engaging in political discourse. You should probably do more reading until you can figure out what's going on. Anyway, much love to everyone, but I've had enough of the nonsense, and I'm just going to start swinging now, because I have had a lot of support for Trump, and I continue to support him, but I do believe that people are right, that there is a genuine risk of, Trump believing that he can get away with appeasing the military lobby of Israel and the mega group and all the rest in proceeding forth with a war against Iran. I don't think that he will actually do that, precisely because he cares more about his own self-image than he does about the will of Israel. And I think he's been courting Israel his entire life because he knows probably more intimately than most Americans, even those who are woke to all this information. He knows how ingrained that power structure is, and he has accepted from a very young age that he has to court that power structure and just basically, wealthy Jewish people in general in New York City. I mean, come on, in order to make his way in the world. And, he's not wrong for doing that. And he's not wrong for being pro-Israel today. He will be extremely wrong if he actually listens to Bolton and goes to war against Iran. But I think that ultimately, when you really look at this from the, quote, 5D chess perspective, that Trump engages in theater strategically in order to get his will in a wider political strategic sense, I think that it's the most plausible situation. I think Occam's razor leads us to that conclusion. And I think all the people who either on one side think that he's an evil asset of Israel and the intelligence agency, I think they're missing the obvious reality that if that was true, then a whole bunch of other things never would have happened. And there's such genuine hatred against him that it doesn't bear out that he's just some secret plant. Like, the hatred would not be that intense and full spectrum and genuine. It would be more easily identifiable as theater. It's not fake hatred. It's genuine hatred that they have for him. And, the fact that he turned down the strike against Iran, he leads them on to the very brink, and then he yanks it back, basically. And to a lot of the people that still judge everything by its surface appearance, that, they're all very mad at Trump right now for even expressing support for Israel. But from the very beginning, I've acknowledged that Trump's words on the surface are not his true intent, and he says things in order to gain a strategic advantage in his longer, chess game that he's playing. And, for people that are of lesser intelligence, they can't perceive it. But I happen to be a very big fan of chess, and I would one day in a perfect universe, I'll actually play a chess match against old Donald Trump once he's retired from office, as the most successful president of the United States, who did not invade Iran, but led them on and basically allowed the ethical people within our intelligence establishment, the White Hats, to take down this evil power structure and to restore balance and justice to the galaxy, if you will. Anyway, here we go. This day, the hunt for Mr. X, Pollard's inside controller, continues. In 1986, Executive Intelligence Review had revealed the existence of not merely a Mr. X, but an X committee, made up of nearly a dozen top-level Pentagon and National Security Council officials, all suspected of having been part of the Pollard spy network. Given the seriousness of the mega security breach, the abrupt shutdown of the mole hunt naturally prompted some wild speculation about the circumstances under which the search for Mega was abandoned. In March 1999, British author Gordon Thomas released a book, Gideon's Spies, which alleged that Israel had blackmailed the Clinton administration with the threat to release tapped telephone conversations between the president and Monica Lewinsky to force Washington to abandon the mega hunt. Indeed, in her testimony before her independent counsel Kenneth Starr, Lewinsky had reported that the president had warned her on March 29, 1997, at the height of the mega hunt, that he suspected the White House telephones were being tapped by agents of an unnamed foreign country. Years later, it was revealed that the White House communications system had been overhauled and modernized during the early Clinton era, and one of the main outside contractors involved in the project was an Israeli firm, Amdocs. According to a May 2000 story in Insight magazine, Amdocs employees would have nearly unfettered access to White House telephone lines and other super-sensitive communications equipment. However, the nature of the request from the Mossad man in Washington to Yatom to obtain a confidential State Department document rules out the possibility that Mega was an electronic eavesdropping source. Mega suspects. Even though the mega hunt was formally called off, still in some U.S. intelligence quarters, the effort to unearth the suspected Israeli spy cell apparently continued. In September 2000, a CIA team of counterintelligence specialists arrived in Israel after U.S. Ambassador Martin Indyk had his security clearances temporarily lifted. Ostensibly, Indyk had breached security guidelines by bringing classified U.S. government documents to his residence in Tel Aviv. But it was later revealed that the CIA probe was triggered by an August 2000 unauthorized meeting between Indyk and the former head of the Mossad, Ephraim Halevi, which the ambassador had never reported back to Washington. If there were anyone in the Clinton administration's political hierarchy who was a prime candidate to be the Israeli spy Mega, it was Indyk. A British-born Australian citizen, Indyk had been Australia's top Mideast security official in the late 1970s as Deputy Director of Current Mideast Intelligence of the Australian Office of National Assessment, the equivalent of the U.S. National Security Council. But Indyk abruptly quit the post after just 10 months, prompting speculation that he had come under suspicion of spying for Israel. He had lived in Israel while completing his dissertation on the power of the weak, the ability of Israel and Egypt to resist the policies of their superpower patrons. Quick sidebar, you see what I'm saying? They're not hiding it. Like Stefan, in the linked video that I had in this morning's video, Satan is not hidden. They've telegraphed everything that they've done. It's because the people are asleep. The Gentiles, right? The Goyim have been asleep, and so they don't, understand what's happening to them. And whose fault is that, right? It's their fault for engaging in it, but it's also the fault of the people who have been conned by it, right? They can sell a lie, but you also bought it. We bought it. I mean, I didn't buy it, but, many of my family bought it. They're still fast asleep. Many people are still fast asleep. But the fact that we have any sizable percentage that is waking up right now is a massive victory. And that's what we should focus on and not be black-pilled. Take that gold pill, baby. Anyway, continuing on. According to British journalist Kevin Dowling, Indyk next service in Israel as a media consultant to Israel's Likud prime ministers Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir. In 1982, Indyk came to America ostensibly on a 6-month sabbatical from his duties with the office of the Israeli prime minister. Based out of Cornell University, Indyk formed a research department for the America-Israeli Public Affairs Committee, IPAC, the official Israeli lobby in the United States. Within a year, IPAC had ponied up $100,000 to Indyk to hive off the research unit as the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, WINEP. Pro-Israel luminaries in Washington, including former Vice President Walter Mondale, former Secretaries of State George Shultz and Alexander Haig, and former United Nations Ambassador Jeane Kirkpatrick were among the initiating members of WINEP's advisory board, according to Dowling's September 27, 2000 account of the Indike counterintelligence probe. Indike's 6-month sabbatical never ended, but it was not until 1987 that the Australian got his first green card, permitting him to work in the United States. Indike was made a U.S. citizen on January 12, 1993, just 8 days before he was appointed to the incoming Clinton administration's National Security Council staff as Senior Director for Near East and South Asian Affairs. Indike had already been an informal Middle East policy advisor to President George H.W. Bush at the initiative of Dennis Ross, Bush's Assistant Secretary of State, previously a deputy to Indike at WINEP. At the time of the mega hunt, Indike had Ross's old job as Assistant Secretary of State for the Near East. Another prime suspect in the mega mole hunt was Leon Forth, Vice President Albert Gore's national security advisor, and another well-known pro-Likud fanatic. The Washington Post, in a 1998 profile of Forth, reported that he was suspected by U.S. intelligence officials of passing sensitive U.S. policy information to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Likud, a passionate personal enemy of President Clinton, who was suspected of activating the mega spy operation. Also on the mega list of suspects inside the Clinton national security apparatus was Richard Clarke, the National Security Council counterterrorism czar, who was fired from the State Department and brought onto the Bush administration National Security Council in 1992, after he was accused by the State Department's Inspector General of concealing illegal Israeli arms sales to China. The Purloined Letter Principle. While all of the above-mentioned Bush and Clinton-era national security operatives may have been, indeed, secretly or not so secretly passing critical American policy papers and classified documents to the Likud faction in Israel, and while then Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his Mossad mandarins may have been attempting to blackmail the President Clinton, there is a much simpler answer to the mega puzzle. Mega was not a deep mole inside the White House. Mega was a far more visible, far more powerful entity, known among its several dozen members as the Mega Group. The existence of the Mega Group came to light almost a year after the Washington Post revealed that the mole hunt was underway. Yet the story of the Mega Group, which appeared in the Wall Street Journal on May 4, 1998, the article we read earlier, made no mention of espionage and did not mention the Mossad, the CIA, or Monica Lewinsky, even in passing. Despite that, the Mega Group precisely fits the story of the elusive mole hunt, in a manner that has profound policy implications to this day, as President George W. Bush struggles to avoid an outbreak of war in the Middle East, which would have devastating consequences for the entire planet. Again, this was written less than 2 weeks before 9/11. People believed that people believed that Bush didn't want to go to war. I have Freudian slip there. I said Trump. I think that Trump actually doesn't want to go to war, but there's a risk that if he thinks that he can get away with it, he might be tempted to do something, and we should not let him have that perception. He should have the correct perception that if anything happens in the Middle East with an invasion on Iran or a strike on Iran, he will not make it to a second term. And even if he's in a second term, the entire right wing will turn on him as hard and as viciously as the entire left wing did from the very beginning. And he may even be impeached. He will have the support of the entire right wing and probably half the left wing, at least half the left wing at that point in Congress. But he will lose the support of the entire American people, all of those who are America first, as he campaigned on. You know, the Israel firsters, they'll just be, having wet dreams about this, potential timeline. But anyway, we'll keep on going, right? President George Bush struggles to avoid an outbreak of war in the Middle East, which would have devastating consequences for the entire planet, indeed.